This week, let's discover the profound connection between Jesus' compassion and our call to live with empathy and compassion. We'll dive into the profound Greek term splanchnizomai, explore the deep emotional reaction of Jesus and what it has to do with the fringe of his garment, and the importance of living in those moments of heartfelt compassion. Join in as we learn to reflect God's love and kindness, bringing healing and wholeness to the world. I must have not watched enough Slim Goodbody as a child, and unfortunately we didn't have the magic school bus. So I just found out this week that the pelvic splanchnic ganglion is a real thing. Okay, one of the more intriguing sermon openers with a real I wonder where on earth this is going to go factor. You see, there's a funny association that hits me when this gospel passage comes around. I never considered that this anatomical feature was real because of the context I saw it in. It was part of the plot in an episode of the animated sitcom Futurama. First of all, you have to know there's a word in the original Greek that's very important to this text, and that our English translations fall way short of conveying this word. If you understand that that word is there, it drives a deeper meaning. The word is splanchnizomai. When I heard the word on the show, it went by so fast that I didn't really catch the pronunciation, but just sort of a casual memory of it that was kind of close. All of that didn't matter though, because the ensuing joke made me laugh so hard that my stomach hurt, I cried, and I got a headache. Those are the very best laughs. They're a little scary because the movie Planes, Trains, and Automobiles caused a hurting stomach, headache, tears, and a severe nosebleed. Pam and I were dating at the time, and she still married me, but the other people in the theater thought they were in the movie Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Well, I thought about that Futurama scene this week and happened to look it up. The doctor there is actually saying a real part of the body whose root word is Greek and shares that with Jesus' reaction today. The root word concerns the area deep in the gut. Usually when we think of something touching us emotionally, we think of the heart. However, that was not the case with something that really grabbed or gripped you in Jesus' time. I think we get a sense of that though. Think about the terms gut feeling or pit of our stomachs. I can relate to a churning stomach when something very serious is about to happen or is happening. They say that comes from deep in our brains, as many animals have a reaction in preparation for fight or flight. The feeling that Jesus is experiencing in the gospel is resulting in a physical reaction. He is fully invested and is not in any way casual, flippant, or just an observer here. The term insinuates an investment to the level of suffering with those in need, which is actually what the word compassion means. That's a powerful feeling, a very deep level of compassion. Well, Jesus' reaction is not rooted in guilt or simple pity. His reaction is one of connection. I saw a vignette from a book written by someone I had never heard of, at least I thought. I still remember my first connection to music. I liked to sing when I was little, and my parents told me about songs that I had liked, but this connection felt different. I must have been around 5 or 6 or so when my mom and dad took me skating for the first time. I remember very little about it except for one thing. It was this one song, and I kept hearing it in my head. It really excited me. I don't know if I'd really heard the whole thing since. Didn't know who sang it. There's no internet then, and a lot of the radio was AM, and that wasn't our station's format. So as I was studying, I found a story about how an individual was unexpectedly overcome by compassion and how it changed their life. I read the story and looked this guy up. It was the guy that sang the song Devil Woman in 1976, the song I remember, and it was his only real U.S. hit. But he was like Elvis in England. In a book about him, it says, 60s British rock star Cliff Richard, once called the bad boy of pop and too sexy for television, became a devout believer and disciple of Jesus. Back in the 70s, he visited missionary outposts in the Sudan and refugee camps in Bangladesh as a part of a mission trip for the Tear Fund. In his book about his conversion to Christianity called Which One's Cliff, he tells how the first morning I must have washed my hands a dozen times. Whenever we stopped, I made a beeline for the communal tap or the well. I didn't want to touch anything, least of all the people. Everyone in those camps, even the babies, was covered in sores and scabs. I was bending down to one little mite, mainly for the photographer's benefit, and trying hard not to have too close a contact, when someone accidentally stood on the child's fingers. He screamed out, and as a reflex, I grabbed hold of him, forgetting all about his dirt and his sores. I remember how that warm little body clinging to me and the crying instantly stopped. At that moment, I knew I had an enormous amount to learn about practical Christian loving, but at least I'd started. I think that flashing moment for Cliff Richard, that moment that grabbed him, is where Jesus abides. There's this word that catches me in the gospel that's really simple, and it reminded me of the reading a few weeks ago. The word was fringe, as in the fringe of his cloak, and I wondered if there was something special about the fringe. As it turns out, there is. The fringe and its number is important because when you look at the tassels, you are to remember God's whole law, all of God's instructions, the things we should do and the things we should not do. The Bible states that it shall be unto you for a fringe, that ye may look upon it and remember all the commandments of the Lord and do them, and that ye go not about after your own heart and your own eyes, after which you used to go astray, that you may remember and do all my commandments and be holy unto your God. The Jewish Community Foundation website points that out. It's there to remind the wearer and those that see it of mitzvot, the plural form of mitzvah, a Hebrew word that roughly translates to commandment. Still, folks commonly, they say, interpret it as a good deed. The term mitzvah comes from the root word zavta, which means connection. A mitzvah is a decisive act that embodies empathy and kindness while bringing us closer to others. Jesus said that he had come to fulfill the law, and it seems as though people saw the hem of his garment on the one embodying God's love and kindness, actually doing mitzvahs as the connecting point. We too can live to reflect God's love and compassion. It's our calling. As it's said, though, we've got to live in the splanknick moments, those gut moments of compassion, and not, quote, going after our own heart and our own eyes, after which we must go astray. James Moore wrote an interesting little story. Once upon a time, there were two men, Mr. Wilson and Mr. Thompson, both seriously ill in the same room of a great hospital. Both had to be kept unusually quiet and still. No reading, no radio, certainly no television and no visitors. Their only entertainment was to talk to each other. Mr. Thompson had to spend all of his time flat on his back. Mr. Wilson, on the other hand, as part of his treatment, was allowed to sit up in bed for an hour each day. His bed was next to the window, and every afternoon, when he was propped up for an hour, he would pass the time by describing to Mr. Thompson what he could see outside. and Mr. Thompson began to live for those hours. Mr. Wilson would look out the window and describe a beautiful park with a lake where there were ducks and swans and children throwing them bread and sailing model boats, softball games and football games and kites flying, flowers and trees and stretches of grass and young lovers walking hand in hand, the skyline of the city off in the distance, and the cars and horse-drawn carriages making their way through the park. One day there was a parade, and Mr. Wilson described every float, every band, and all the participants in the procession. Mr. Thompson listened intently, enjoying every minute. He could visualize everything Mr. Wilson described. Then one afternoon, Mr. Thompson thought to himself, just wait a minute. Why should Wilson have all the fun? Why does he have all the pleasure? Why does he get to be by the window? Well, in a few days, Mr. Thompson turned really sour. He was bitter, angry, resentful. He brooded and seethed. He became obsessed with wanting to be by the window. And each passing hour, he became more and more resentful of Mr. Wilson. Then one night, quite suddenly, Mr. Wilson died. His body was taken away the next morning. As soon as it seemed decent, Mr. Thompson asked if he could be moved to the bed next to the window. So they moved him, tucked him in, made him quite comfortable, and left him alone. The minute they'd gone, Mr. Thompson struggled to prop himself up on one elbow so that he could look out the window and imagine his surprise. It faced a blank brick wall. One had been living in compassion, and for the other, and alleviating the suffering of another. Let's listen to our gut more and live for our neighbor. Let's ask ourselves, how would Jesus feel? And let that drive our actions for our neighbors. There's healing in the connection, and it is God's desire that all be healed and whole.